So this session will be recorded so that folks who either didn't have the chance to join us today or did join but want to revisit the contents discussed can access it on our website and YouTube channel. And so I've just started that recording now. People are joining us from all across Canada, it seems so far. I'm noticing Toronto. Maya's joining us from Toronto, Hamilton, another one from Hamilton, more from Hamilton, which makes sense as we are based at McMaster University. Joining from St. Catharines, Ontario. Awesome. Cool and sunny here too. Sue is joining us from Vancouver. Smiths Falls. Ah, I've never heard of that one. Outside of Ottawa. Oh, I haven't ventured out yet today. I guess we'll find out soon in the afternoon. North York. Awesome. So we have a few more folks trickling in. As they do, I can begin to share some of housekeeping and just some early remarks. I mentioned the session will be recorded just for educational and possibly research purposes, mainly educational. Cameras are optional, but we encourage folks to turn their videos on and so we can see your beautiful faces. It helps with engagement, especially for the Q&A period, but completely optional. Captions have been enabled automatically through this Zoom so that folks can read along as folks are talking, just to help with accessibility. If it's not visible to you, there should be a place for you to click Enable Captioning on your Zoom settings at the bottom. So please feel free to do that. Please use the chat to engage and ask any questions. We will have a Q&A period, so having those questions written out will be really helpful for us to get those answered for you. In the Q&A period, feel free to engage by unmuting your mic, raising your hand, and or through the chat, whatever you feel comfortable doing. If you want to participate anonymously, feel free to change your name to whatever you feel comfortable with. So the agenda for the day, we have an hour and 30 minutes that we'll be spending together, starting out with opening remarks that I'm doing right now. And then we'll start with our first presentation for about 25 minutes, and then we'll go into our second presentation. After that, we'll have 25 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll close off at around 1:25. So at the EQCC Hub, we also like to do something called a comfort agreement. And so this comfort agreement just addresses a few extra things that weren't in the opening remarks from the previous slide. First piece is around AI use. We like to avoid any AI tools that record or take notes in the background just for safety and privacy reasons. However, if you would like a transcript or a summary of the session to be provided to you, there is an automatic transcript that's being generated from my end, so I will be happy to prepare that and send that to you. Just let us know. Sometimes our webinar topics cover content that may be sensitive in nature, and so if at any point you feel that contents from this session are sensitive, you feel free to step away and do what is necessary for you to stay comfortable. And also, please respectfully engage with the discussion today. And yeah, we always embrace diverse opinions, and so all of that is welcome. The topic of our amazing webinar today is called Co-Designing Communication Tools from Autistic Youth to Transgender and Gender Diverse Adults. So we have wonderful speakers here who will be sharing more later. Before I get into the introductions of all these wonderful speakers and hand it off to them, I want to share a land acknowledgement. And so the Equity-Based Co-Creation Hub is based at McMaster University. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Agreement. And when I think about being welcomed onto this land, I feel particularly grateful as an immigrant who's been living in Canada for about 12 years now. And more recently, as we celebrate Earth Day, it makes me think even deeply about what this earth means and how we can think of and embrace Indigenous ways of respecting and really giving back to the land and adopting that into the ways that we also appreciate the land. All righty, going back now to this wonderful slide. So I would like to introduce to you the amazing speakers that we have today. We'll start off with Brian Hanna. Brian is in their second year of the Master's in Arts in Health and Aging program within the Department of Health, Aging and Society at McMaster. They completed their bachelor's degree at Queen's University in Health Sciences alongside a certificate in sexual and gender diversity. Brian's master's research is part of a larger project exploring sexual well-being for trans and gender diverse, or TGD adults, with their project specifically looking at TGD adults' experiences of the sexual changes that have been associated with their gender journeys. Brian will be presenting for the second half of the webinar today. Maya Albin is our other speaker. She is a speech language pathologist and PhD candidate at McMaster's School of Rehabilitation Science under the supervision of Dr. Michelle Phoenix. Maya's thesis research focuses on advancing neurodiversity, affirming speech language pathology services for autistic youth. Maya is funded by the SSHRC Canada Graduate Scholarship Doctoral Award and an Autism Alliance of Canada Data to Policy Fellowship. Maya will be presenting alongside her team members, Rebecca and Onelli. Rebecca Shaw is a PhD student at U of T, Boise in higher education and an autistic self-advocate. Her research focuses on autistic students' experience training to become research leaders in support of the philosophy, nothing about us without us. Rebecca's professional background is in student transition and academic support, but she is currently focusing on her studies. Last but not least, we have Onelli Sorayaheti. Onelli is a Bachelor of Science candidate at McMaster University and research assistant at McMaster's School of Rehabilitation Science under the supervision of Dr. Michelle Phoenix. As a Sri Lankan woman of color and sibling of an autistic youth, Onelli brings an intersectional, equity-focused perspective grounded in lived experience and contributes to decolonial and inclusive approaches in disability research. So an amazing group that we have here. At this moment, I'll stop sharing and hand it off to our first group, Maya, Onelli, and Rebecca, to share and start their presentation.
Awesome. Can you see it okay? Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Really looking forward to being here and thanks for tuning in. So, myself, Rebecca, and Onelli will all be sharing together about our reflections from our team, Bridge CPT, on our co design process. And big shout out to the rest of our team of autistic youth and adults and our supervisor, Dr. Michelle Phoenix. So we don't have any specific financial relationships to disclose for the work. Some non-financial disclosures are my funding, as well as our community partner, Dory Zenner and Associates on our study. So today in our presentation, we'll talk a little bit about why co-design for autism research, talk about the Bridge CPT as an example of a co-design study, and then really focus on co-design takeaways from our team members and study participants and how we applied co-design principles, both at the level of the team and for the co-design participants. And finally, talk a little bit about where can co-design in autism research go from here. So it won't be focused so much on the content of what we found in our study, more so actually about our co-design process. So briefly, I always like to have everyone meet the team. Some of us are here and some of us are not. But briefly, my name's Maya. I already read the bio, but this picture of me is something that I really love to do and an interest of mine, which is getting out into nature. And this was a trip that I took. And I can turn it over to our other team members to introduce themselves too, mostly with a personal intro, because we already heard their bios. If you want to go ahead, Rebecca.
Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Rebecca, and I originally came from our community partner, Dory Zenner and Associates, but even when that job was over, I continued on because I'm really interested in supporting projects like this. And that's my cat,
And
Hector, who I'm trying to get to love me, and he is resisting still.
thanks. Go ahead, Ellie.
Hi everyone, my name is Onelli. This is a picture of me and my puppy Ellie. Yeah, I'm a second year at Mac and I'm really excited to be presenting today on inclusive research.
Awesome, thanks. And I think beyond people's just CVs and bios, I think always thinking about what people's interests are is really important in our co-design space and what matters for people's daily lives. So first, we'll start a little bit with why co-design in autism research. And I will let Rebecca take us away.
Sure. So before we get more into our study, I just wanted to take a moment to set the stage about co-design in autism research more generally. There's growing agreement in the field of autism research that autism research needs to be done with autistic people and not just about them. That means autistic people leading the work, being involved from the very beginning, and having real influence over who gets studied and how. And so, as mentioned in my bio, nothing about us without us is the foundation here. There have been some great advances in co-design for autism research, including the Aspire practice-based guidelines, which outline key principles when partnering with autistic people as study team members or participants of research. Autism research also should be strengths-based, which is a change from lots of research that has traditionally talked about autism from a deficit perspective. So the guiding question throughout autism research should always be, how will this research actually make a difference in autistic people's lives? So why does this approach matter? So there are a few reasons. Most importantly, autistic people should be the ones shaping research priorities and the decisions that impact their lives. Autistic people's perspectives, like many other equity deserving groups, have often been left out of research or not valued in the same way of non-autistic researchers and clinicians. We also know that co-design improves the research created when autistic people are generally a part of the research team, genuinely part of the research team. The questions we ask are better. The materials we create make more sense, and the findings are more meaningful. It builds trust with the team and the broader community, and it creates real opportunities for autistic researchers like me to grow and lead. In qualitative research, especially, lived experience is a genuine methodological strength. Autistic people are often best placed to understand and interpret other autistic people's experiences. That's the foundation that our study is built on, and now I'm going to pass it over to Maya to show you what it looked like in practice.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. So now I'll tell you a bit about the Bridge CPT study, which was created based on a lot of these foundational principles and values. So we know that people close to autistic youth, like parents, siblings, and friends, need resources to improve their own communication and help autistic youth be better understood. We also know that equity deserving groups like autistic people are often excluded from research engagement due to stigma, lack of supports, and ableist research structures and practices. So, our study team asked the question, what co created content and resources should be included in a communication partner training program for autistic youth and their close communication partners? So, this idea of communication partner training really refers to what should other people know and do to be better communicators with autistic youth. Often interventions really have focused on what autistic youth need to do to change, but we want to flip the script a little bit in a much more neuroaffirming way to ask, how can we change the environment around them? How can we change how other people around them provide support? Our acronym Bridge CPT stands for Bridging Relationships through Inclusive Co-Design to guide effective communication partner training. And our study logo was co-designed alongside our awesome autistic youth team member, Milo, and the rest of the team. And this bridge really represents what our study works towards. The rainbow in our logo represents our team being inclusive to all aspects of diversity, but we'd specifically like to acknowledge the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. That's part of our study team, members on our study team, as well as very much part of the autistic community more broadly. So broadly, from a methods perspective, we're guided by equity-based co-creation principles. And we use something called the double diamond design process to organize the different phases of our co-design. I won't get too nitty gritty into the methods today, but overall, we had a number of parts to the project. And overall, we followed a method called qualitative description, which really meant that we listened to people's perspectives and meant to really show what people are saying and stay close to what they were saying, rather than having a lot of interpretation from the interviews and the focus groups. For our data types, I'll go over them a little more in the next slide, but we had interviews and focus groups. So when we think about, there we go here, visualize another way, you can see our study journey. So we began, before the study began, by building our co-design team. We invited 5 autistic youth and adults with diverse ages, gender identities, diagnosis journeys, and research experiences, or no research experience, to join the team. And together we co-produced and came up with what our research questions should be, what the study protocol was, and materials like our interview guides, our consent forms, all of the things that were part of the study were co-designed. Team members throughout the project have been involved in analyzing our data, leading and running the focus groups, disseminating knowledge, and any other roles based on their interests. So in the first part of data collection, we conducted over 40 semi-structured interviews with autistic youth, people close to them, and speech-language pathologists, with the goal of understanding what people should know or do to improve their communication with autistic youth. Then afterwards, we analyzed the interview data and presented it back in 6 small focus groups to participants. In these small groups, participants worked together to co-create resources about communication. Examples of topics included common communication preferences of autistic youth, how the environment impacts communication, and the importance of non-spoken communication options like augmentative and alternative communication. Each group explored one of these themes in detail in their small group and created a resource prototype for how to teach that information. Finally, we had a large focus group where all participants got together to see what each of the small groups created. They gave feedback on each resource and reflected on their co-design experience. The car shows where we're at now in our journey. We finished all those phases, but we're going ahead with knowledge translation and incorporating the feedback from the focus groups to improve the resources. Again, beyond this overview, our presentation today won't focus on what we found in the interviews and the focus groups, although we'd love to share, and we have a celebration event coming up where we'll say more. But it will really focus on the co-design as part of our study journey. Before I turn it over to Anneli, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm seeing like red and green lines on the screen. I don't know if someone's drawing on the screen by any chance, but I was worried my computer was breaking, so I might have got a little distracted. Nelly's going to take it from here and talk about our co-design principles and how they were put into practice for our study team and participants.
Yeah, so how did we actually use this co-design in practice? It really started from the very beginning, as Maya mentioned, with how the team itself was built. So securing funding early was really important to us to make sure that team members could be involved from the initial stages all the way to the very end. So our team members were actively shaping core parts of the study, like the research questions, the consent forms, recruitment materials, and then we also decided early on together how communication would work across the project. Another really important part was creating a diverse team. We wanted a team with different lived experiences, perspectives, identities, and levels of research experience. So we wanted to bring together people who would notice different things and ask different questions. For example, through my background as a South Asian, there were conversations around cultural trauma-informed language during the testing of our interview guides, and that actually changed how parts of that process happen with the participants. We also made roles very clear upfront and throughout the project. So that included things like the time commitment, the pay, meeting schedules, and how decisions would be made after receiving input on the teams from the team. And that included being very clear about methodological decisions and timelines that wouldn't be able to be changed. And being clear from that from the very beginning led to a lot of positive feedback from our team members, especially around feeling more comfortable expressing what felt realistic for them and understanding the different ways that they could participate. And these practices that I just described align with established guidelines for autism research called the Aspire Practice-Based Guidelines. These guidelines focus on topics like communication, power sharing, compensation, and meaningful involvement across the whole research process. So often we do talk about co-design principles or guidelines, and then we leave them at general categories such as building and maintaining trust or building community capacity. So today I'll give a few specific examples of how you can take real steps to apply these principles in research. The principle of effective communication and power sharing guided how we created multiple ways to contribute and communicate. So everyone was included equally, no matter how they were participating. So someone who was speaking out loud did not triumph over someone who was typing in the chat. And this also meant recognizing that communication preferences and needs could change from meeting to meeting and even within the same meeting. So that flexibility was really important for us. And then another key principle is building community capacity. And so team members were given multiple opportunities during the project to grow in ways that matched the goals and interests that they were sharing during meeting reflections. So people were able to present in conferences, lead focus groups, or really take on whatever roles were meaningful to them. Many of our team members had no prior research experience, so these were all new skills. And this principle relates to what Rebecca will talk about later on, which is building capacity for autistic-led research in the future. The principle of collaborative and transparent partnership also led to frequent reflections on positionality and power, as well as many opportunities to provide feedback. At the end of all our meetings, we have a set quiet time for team members to evaluate group processes, both verbally and in writing. And this feedback could also be given during meetings or afterwards through email. And through this process, we really learn what works best for the team. So we learned about things like needing more processing time, sending guideline documents alongside event or project information, providing reminders, or using tools like the raise hand function. So we also carried these co-design practices into how participants experience the co-design process, from recruitment and consent all the way to the interviews and focus groups. We used accessible recruitment materials and learned participant preferences early on through our survey questions. And then we also offered flexible consent options, including verbal consent as well as written consent. We also included supports like a study video that went over the consent form in a more visual way and allowed participants to meet our study team in advance and have more time to process the consent information in visual form before having that discussion with Maya. For interviews, the guides were piloted and edited with team members from those different participant groups, including siblings, SLPs, and autistic youth. So through this, we were able to get helpful feedback on things like language and the number of questions being asked and whether it may become overwhelming. Through this piloting, our team members suggested adding fill-in-the-blank questions as well as open-ended ones, which really helped with accessibility when that process happened with participants later on. Participants also had options in how they engage, such as typing, speaking out loud, or receiving questions in advance. For focus groups, we made expectations really clear by sharing materials and timelines in advance, as well as creating opportunities for feedback before and after. So participants could email Maya at any time, and we also included a few minutes at the end of each group to share positive and constructive anonymous feedback with the team in our group process. We also had visual ways to participate. So we had editable sticky notes and a Slido, which were suggested by some of our autistic team members. We also tried to create a more balanced dynamic by recognizing the different lived experiences that people were bringing into the space. And this looked like our facilitators inviting our autistic youth to share their perspective and monitoring if other groups like parents or clinicians were talking more than the youth themselves. And allowing for anonymous feedback on our resources and our processes also helped reduce these power imbalances. And now that we've learned about co-design practices in our study, it's time to think ahead into autistic-led research and what that could look like. So I will turn it over to Rebecca to tell us about where research can go from here in terms of autistic leadership.
Thanks, Sonali. Now you're going to hear from my special interest a little bit. So my focus for the rest of the presentation today is on how we can move from participation to leadership in autism research. I want to talk a bit about what it means for autistic people, not just to take part in studies, but to actually lead them and what needs to change in academia to make that possible. Many autistic research face what Ergo calls a double bind, being seen as both too autistic or not autistic enough to be credible. When I tell people about my research, some assume I'm studying autism because I want to help the community, not because I'm part of it. And that's telling to me. It shows how much academia still assumes that real expertise comes from non-autistic people studying autistic lives. Byrne 2022 describes this as the hidden curriculum in higher education, which does affect everybody, but can be very overwhelming for autistic students. That means all the unspoken rules and social expectations that can make autistic people feel like outsiders before we even start. Historically, a lot of autism research has been shaped by non-autistic voices, and that has caused some real harm. Researchers show that ableist assumptions have often been mistaken for scientific accuracy. And as Dantas and colleagues point out, this kind of deficit framing limits how we even imagine autistic thriving. When autistic people lead research, we ask different questions, questions rooted in our lived experience, and that changes everything about how knowledge is created and used. But to get there, academia itself has to change. So Byrne talks about how grad school has a hidden set of expectations, how to network, how to sound academic, how to perform competence. And that's exhausting if you've already spent years masking or trying to fit in. As lots of us know, accessibility isn't just about ramps or having captions. It's also about flexible timelines, mentorship, and having emotional safety. We need research spaces where autistic students can learn and lead without constantly burning out or feeling like imposters. And scholars like Kirschbaum and Price show that when disability is centered in research, not just as an afterthought, it actually changes how knowledge itself is built. So ultimately, we need more clear paths for autistic people to lead projects, secure funding, and publish. That means valuing lived experience as real expertise and not just personal background. Co-creation, working alongside others, helps us to build confidence and experience, but leadership is what would make a lasting change. Because if we want research that truly reflects autistic lives, autistic people do need to be the ones shaping it. So the takeaway from all of this is co-creation is the first step, but leadership is where real change happens.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca. So just to finish off our more formal part of the presentation, we really want lots of engagement and discussion. So we have lots of time for that. Today's presentation focused a lot on our co-design process and co-design in autism research. But if people want to hear more about the study, including about the co-design, but also about what did we find in terms of what helped communication for autistic youth, or what resources did we create that autistic youth made and could be ready to use by anyone in the community, please register for our celebration event. It's a free Zoom call where we'll be presenting a bit more about the study with our whole team together and really wanting to engage with whoever comes to talk about the work and really focus not on academia, but on like how anyone can pick up these resources and use them and maybe find value in the work we've co-created for their own lives. I'm going to leave the QR code up for a sec. And in terms of the references, I'll put them quickly here. But I do know that we're going to be sharing, I think Tniet said, PDF of the slide. So we'll make sure all those references are there too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maya, Rebecca, and Onelli. At this point, before we transition to the next presentation, we have about 5 minutes to answer any particular questions you have about this project that you really want um, to ask right now. If it's more general, we can save it for the Q&A at the end. And so one of the questions was already addressed around the summary list of citations, which will be provided by the team. Um, any immediate comments or questions that you have for Maya, Rebecca, and Onelli? I'll just pause to see if folks wanted to share. From my end, I really enjoyed that presentation, and I really liked the emphasis that Rebecca and the whole team placed around moving engagement from just participation of autistic youth to actually having them be involved in leadership, which includes paying attention to what they find valuable out of an experience like this. And, it's easy for us to provide compensation and use that as a way of acknowledging their contribution, but it's more than that. It's capacity building, like you said, and listening to the opportunities that they would like. And I really liked how that was emphasized. Anyone else want to say a thing about the presentation before we move forward?
And just give people a minute to process or write in the chat. I know some people prefer that.
Yes, we have a comment in the chat from Chris. Super appreciated the detailed walkthrough of how you created opportunity for true participation. Definitely modeled a practice that's hard to achieve in some cases, with two smiley faces. Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Totally agree about that.
I guess maybe while people are reflecting or writing, one thought that I had, and Rebecca, I'll call on you if you want, feel free to build on this, but I think also within like co-design and co-creation, it is a spectrum, which I think is the spectrum of involvement, in addition to thinking about the autism spectrum, of course, lots of spectrums. But within a co-design project, I think that there's projects and opportunities that are more consultation, but there's also opportunities to shape the research questions and to show leadership. So I don't know if that's something, not to put you on the spot, Rebecca, you don't have to share, but what do you like? Do you think there's ways if people want to do co-design and think about autistic leadership? Are there ways that they could try to embed that, even if it's not like autistic researcher led?
Yeah, and you did a really good job of it with this project. I think especially really difficult doing your doctoral research with co-design. So I do think that you were quite successful in that way. Um, it is also like people sharing their strengths, but also presenting what the options are for participation was really important in our group because the thing is sometimes, like anybody, we don't really know what is out there and what might um, contribute to building our capacities. But I do think like the main thing that came out of it was confidence building. And I think that is inclusive of all of our team, whether it's myself becoming a researcher or some of the youth who just kind of building their voice in kind of the advocacy space has been really successful. I probably didn't answer your question, but that's my 2 cents.
No, I think you did. Like, just what are the ways you can get at that aspect of leadership and capacity building within co-design too? And of course, ideally, all autistic-led projects and building capacity for autistic researchers. But for people to know that there's an in between, and you can still try to do as well as you can with the in between.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. A lot of activity in the chat since we last checked. So some more comments from Trish. Really interesting account of how co-design was used. I loved particularly that you, as Chris had said, how you enabled people to communicate and engage in different ways. Michelle asks a question here. This team has learned a lot about how to work together and present together. Do you want to share anything that you learned or changed along the way? But before I have you folks answer, I think this could also apply to Brian's presentation. So maybe this one we can save for the end. Great question, Michelle. Maddie says this should be a presentation that leads the week at places like Canadian Autism Leadership Summit, set the template for everyone else involved in research around autism. And it seems like, Maya, you attended that event?
Yes, and it was a pleasure to meet Maddie there. But I do think I appreciate your point, Maddie, because I think sometimes we talk a lot about these principles, like we said in our presentation, like you need to build trust and you need to power share. But like sometimes we got to break it down a little further about what does that actually mean when you're doing a project in a meeting and in your emails and in other things. Yes, we do need to aspire to greatness. Great use of the aspire acronym.
Awesome. Oh, and all, I don't want to miss anything. I'm like, no, before Ollie, there was Brian Robinson. That's an excellent point related to doing co-design for graduate work. It establishes leadership, but takes courage because it is harder in some ways. So extra congrats. And then Ollie asks a question about recruitment. What was the process of recruitment for finding the code signers, and was there an interview process or co-designers? Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. And then if O'Nelly and Rebecca, if you want to jump in about like kind of your experience finding out about the project or how you made decisions about if you wanted to join. We tried to be really purposive in who we were inviting. So through our community partner, we were trying to think about people with different lived and living experiences in terms of their diagnosis journey. Were they diagnosed when they were younger? Were they diagnosed later in life? Do they self identify as autistic? We also were thinking about things about like gender diversity. We also approached specific groups like the South Asian Autism Society and wanting to think a lot about cultural intersections too for who could be part of our team. Yeah, really just trying to think about balance of people who had research experience or who didn't, various gender identities, various ages, so that when we were creating something together, we had diversity and perspectives in what was meaningful. And I'm thinking even about questions like we all decided together who should be part of the study and what research questions should we ask and what questions should we ask in our interview guides. So having different perspectives coming together, I think, was really valuable for that. And then we did give like a handout that had more information, but I'll turn it over to Rebecca for what you were going to share.
Yeah, I also just want to mention that the team took really did think about then the 40 participants as well to make sure that also because we did have, certain homogeneous members on the team, but we really did with them the recruitment of participants, I think, to even broaden that diversity even more.
Yeah, that's a great point about like kind of the two layers of co-design, the team who are not participants and created the study together, but then also the 40-ish participants. We had lots of diversity in kind of ages of the youth from 15 to 24, racial and ethnic background, culture, age of diagnosis, and then also within people close to them. Were they friends, siblings, parents? Were they close to someone who had very high support needs or lower support needs? So those are some of the things more in the details of our project itself for the celebration event. But we did give an information sheet that explained to all of our team members who might be interested, here's the project, here's a bit about Maya and Michelle Phoenix. Here's a little bit about how many hours it will be, approximately how many hours per month. Here's what you'll be paid. Here's the kind of things you can expect to do. Everyone will come to the team meetings, but some people will do different things, and these are what those different things could be.
Amazing. And I don't know if this was kind of addressed the question from safer spaces. I think I skipped it as I jumped to the other question. It was about I would appreciate a summary of the inclusion pieces for virtual workshops if possible, so I can incorporate them into how I facilitate virtual workshops. So you've voiced a lot of those um, examples that you incorporated, Maya. So uh, yeah, would that be possible to share with?
Yeah, I think a lot of those probably were also on the slides O'Nelly was sharing about, like, what did we do during the focus groups, during the interviews. Um, I'm wondering, both O'Nelly and Rebecca, you facilitated our focus groups. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the question from Safer Spaces about, like, if you have a really small team and you don't have a moderator like us, you're running the show and facilitating. What are some tips that you might give?
Um, well, I mean, this isn't possible in all situations, but one of the unique things was that we had multiple focus groups, and so we were able to reflect at each one on how to ensure that participation was more inclusive and effective between each. So we debriefed after each group. Um, Sorry, I just lost my thought. I had one other thing to say. My apologies. Oh, Nelly, did you
No,
have
that's okay.
it?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me, as I mentioned during the presentation too, was making a meaningful effort to balance those lived experiences and contributions. So, like if we did see that one group was sharing more or the first to speak, we were making sure that we were, encouraging contributions from autistic youth and encouraging and creating a space that allowed for that.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just build off of what you both were saying to say, like, to build off of Rebecca's point, both our team members like stayed on after the focus group to just jot down our key impressions of what went well, what we should change for the next iteration, because we did 6 2-hour focus groups and then a 7th big one. But also, we asked participants, like, we left the last 10 minutes of each focus group to have anonymous sticky notes on a page and to drag them to a section that was like, what did you really appreciate? What did you like? Anything we can do different next time? Like, from a really, we wanted to hear throughout from our participants how we could keep improving.
Thank you, everyone, for your incredible questions. We will have more time at the end. If any other questions pop up in your mind, we can save them for later, and Michelle will address that question later as well. So at this point, we will thank you so much to this team for this presentation. We'll transfer it over to Brian, who will be telling us about their project.
Right.
Yes.
Let me share my screen, which we practice, so hopefully all will go well. If someone wouldn't mind just letting me know.
Yes, it
Okay,
works.
perfect. We're working. Okay, this is awesome. Okay, and sorry, my laptop is half the screen is cracked, so I'm not able to see the chat or anything. So if there's any like pressing questions or if like the slides aren't moving, if someone wouldn't mind just unmuting and letting me know, that would be awesome. But anyway, with that out of the way, yeah, thank you, Maya, Rebecca, and Onelli for that phenomenal presentation. And you mentioned this like spectrum of co-design and co-creation, and I think that sort of leads well into what I'll be talking about, which is sort of at I guess a different spot on that spectrum. So yeah, thank you all for joining today. My name is Brian. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm going to be sharing about my master's research and the co-creative knowledge exchange project that I'm helping to orchestrate through the support of the EQCC Hub, which aims to foster sexual health or well-being for trans and gender diverse or TGD adults. So I'm the only one able to be here to speak today, but that does not mean I'm the only one on the team. So to give you a little bit of background on who's working on this, you already heard my introduction earlier, but yeah, I'm a master's student in the Department of Health, Aging, and Society at McMaster. I also have like a lot of work experience working with 2S LGBTQ plus communities, and that's sort of where my passion and research interests lie. I'm completing my master's under the supervision of Dr. Jessica Maxwell, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Health, Aging, and Society. And so that's sort of our McMaster team. And then it was through Dr. Maxwell that I got connected with folks at Acadia University, which is sort of one of the other groups of our team. So I'm working alongside another master's student, Marcus, who's completing their Master of Science in Clinical Psychology under the supervision of Dr. Stephanie Gauvin, who is an assistant professor an associate professor in the Department of Psychology there. And then last but not least, of course, is the community group that we're working with, made up of trans and gender diverse adults, as well as their loved ones. For today, I'm just going to keep them anonymous. We're still actually doing the co-creation project, and it's sort of like in the ramping up stage. And given the current political climate, and since this is going to be like published on YouTube, the recording, I just think in the interest of safety, I'll just refer to them as the community group that we're working with throughout. But anyway, the group is a grassroots group of folks who are trans and gender diverse, as well as their loved ones, who gather to share stories and experiences, provide peer support, and assist one another in navigating various challenges, gender related and not. They also offer a lot of mutual aid resources. They do a lot of like event facilitation and collaboration with other organizations in the community. So like they do TGD only swim spaces and things like that. So a lot of awesome work from there. I will try not to be too bogged down in the research itself, because I know we're here to talk about co-design and co-creation. But I think it is important context for the co-creation project and sort of like why we've come to this opportunity and why we want to have this approach. And then also a quick note on language. I know everyone comes to events like this with varying levels of knowledge. I'm going to be talking lots about gender identity. I'm also going to talk a lot about sex. So just a heads up in case that's something that feels a little bit uncomfortable. And as a quick reminder, gender identity and sexuality are different concepts. So gender identity is someone's like internal sense of gender, whereas sexuality or sexual orientation, sexual identity, I use those sort of synonymously, refers to who someone is sexually attracted to. And just like cisgender folks, so folks who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, in the same way that cisgender folks can occupy any of a variety of sexualities or identify with them, so can TGD folks, despite, I think, some common misconceptions around that. So as a quick history on medicalization in relation to TGD identity, being trans or gender diverse is medicalized, which basically means that it's seen as a medical issue, which can be managed or needs to be solved through medical intervention. So we can think of traditional medical forms of gender affirming care that come to mind for a lot of folks, things like gender affirming hormone therapy or gender confirmation surgeries. And that's not to say that that care isn't essential and vital for many folks in the community, but it's just to highlight how institutions have conceptualized TGD identity. I'll also note, I'm going to talk a lot about medical gender affirming care in this. Not all TGD people want to access medical forms of transition, and it's completely valid not to do so. But yeah, just as a little note on that. And so anyway, the community has been historically and continues to be treated by medical institutions as medically and psychologically abnormal. And this pathologization has extended into the realm of sexuality. And there's lots of history here stretching like way back into the early 1900s, which isn't to say that that's when like TGD folks were invented, but just that's when institutions started taking an interest, at least in a Western context. But to give you the extremely concise summary, in order to access medical gender affirming care, TGD folks require diagnosis of what is now labeled gender dysphoria, but which has gone through many iterations. And the corresponding diagnostic tools for doing so continue to require TGD people to quote unquote prove in some way that they're like actually transgender based on very cis heteronormative ideals of binary gender, which has shifted a little bit in recent years as there's, I think, grown to be more acceptance of non-binary gender identities, but still holds true. So originally, the first diagnostic tool, which was published in 1966 for transsexual women, included criteria, which basically said that in order to be eligible for gender confirmation surgery, these women had to be disgusted by their own genitalia, and they had to have weak libido, preoccupation with body alteration, making sexual activity secondary, and preference for heterosexual partnership. And so even after this tool was abandoned, echoes of those criteria have remained in diagnosis of gender dysphoria within this medical management of TGD folks for decades. And so in that way, dysfunctional sexuality has been built into trans identity because individuals can only access gender affirming care or have historically only been able to if they were heterosexual and exhibited that like dysfunctional sexuality. And so consequently, TGD folks began experiencing pressure to conform with those ideals, even if that wasn't someone's lived experience or wasn't how they felt. There was pressure to conform out of concern that otherwise the gender affirming care that they wanted and needed would be denied. And so shifting a little bit into like, why does that matter? Sexual health, broadly defined, and sexual satisfaction are known to be important to overall quality of life for a lot of folks, not everyone, but for many people. And so this treatment of TGD people by institutions as though incapable of having fulfilling sexual lives is really concerning and very problematic. The framing of TGD people all having dysfunctional sexuality has extended beyond diagnosis and also permeates gender or medical gender affirming care itself, referred to as a deficit framework. So even for TGD folks who do choose to access medical gender affirming care, they're still seen as having to make like a trade-off because of the impacts that medical gender affirming care can have on various dimensions of individuals' sexual lives, which I refer to broadly as just sexual changes. These quote unquote dysfunctional changes are often the focus of the little research that is done on TGD sexuality. And then also within that research, we see the strong preoccupation with TGD folks' experiences of gender dysphoria during sex or at the prospect of sex. And this focus, again, underscores the use of a deficit framework within research and ignores the reality that TGD people can feel euphoric in their genders outside of sex and during sex, regardless of where they're at in their gender journeys or what forms of transition they want to pursue or are pursuing, if at all. And also that folks can develop strategies to maximize gender euphoria in sexual contexts and minimize gender dysphoria and have those positive experiences. But community members are resilient. They've shown ongoing resistance to this institutionalized deficit framework, advocating for themselves broadly and also specifically within the realm of sexual health by circulating information pertaining to them that's inaccessible outside of the community. So as a couple of examples, I've put 3 up here that I like. This is not an exhaustive list whatsoever. But for many, many decades, TGD community members have operated at both large scales and also smaller scales to circulate community knowledge, organizing to create works like zines, which center their own experiences in their own words. And again, those are some examples on the screen. And with this introduction of zines, I should probably define what a zine is, because I know that's something that not everyone is necessarily familiar with. But zines are basically like short self-published DIY publications that have sort of like some sort of theme or communicate some sort of information. They're like very informal, typically like artsy magazines, sort of. Yeah, might have a mixture of like visual art, commentary, poetry, collage, or like other cut and paste art. that's sort of the vibe. So with that background out of the way, it brings us to the research that I'm part of. So Marcus, the other master's student at Acadia, who I'm working with, and I were both really interested in doing a study where we could hear from TGD people about their lived experiences of sexuality, since there seems to be such discrepancy between how research talks about it and how folks actually experience it and what their lived experiences. To answer our research questions, we completed 50 qualitative semi-structured interviews with TGD adults across Canada to learn about their experiences with and perspectives on gender-affirming care-related sexual changes, as well as just generally their experiences of gender pleasure or euphoria and gender dysphoria during sex. The results of that currently being analyzed. We're doing our data analysis right now. So I can't share that, but if anyone is interested, I can provide my email, and then you can email me if you would like a summary of the results. But that's also not what we're here to talk about. So I will keep it moving right along. And at this point, I've been talking for a while. You might be wondering, where's the co-creation? This sounds like just normal, standard research protocol. And that's because co-creation wasn't initially built into our project. So going into our master's degrees, Marcus and I both knew we wanted to do some form of knowledge translation after we finished, because we wanted to make sure that the knowledge that we gained from community made its way back out to community, because we both feel that that's an important part of doing research equitably and like just research. And so we had this idea of maybe doing a zine in our minds because it seemed like the most feasible option, but we weren't totally sure what that would look like. And then last year, I was forwarded the call for applications for the EQCC Innovation Grant. And that really piqued my interest as something that seemed very aligned with my values and something that could allow us to really meaningfully engage in knowledge exchange, so having like more of a back and forth with community members, rather than just, I think, sort of the unidirectional way that knowledge translation has maybe historically been done, where it's just like sort of the researchers figuring out how to make it more accessible and then putting it out to community. This seemed like a good way for us to have a little bit of like back and forth. So in an ideal world, we maybe would have been able to incorporate co-creation from the very beginning of the project, but unfortunately, given the timeline of our master's degrees, and by the time that we heard about this opportunity, it wasn't feasible to backtrack. So we decided, let's sort of keep the originally like typical traditional research plan and incorporate co-creation as we move ahead, so moving forward. And our ability to successfully undertake this co-creation, I think has been really grounded in two factors. So the first one was the experience of Dr. Govan, Marcus's supervisor, with arts-based knowledge translation. She was a co-editor on a comic book anthology published a few years ago called Rainbow Reflections, which offered queer men's perspectives on body issues. And so it sort of blended like these comics based on lived experience with research that's been done on body image for queer men. And so her experience with that meant that she was very supportive of us also pursuing an arts-based knowledge exchange opportunity, because she'd seen the value of it and she'd studied that, and also had a little bit of experience. And then the second most important thing was my pre-existing relationship with the chair of the TGD community group that we're collaborating with. So I'd previously worked under their supervision, developing programming for 2S LGBTQ+ young adults. And so we already had a very positive relationship established. We'd worked together for quite a while. And so going into this project, when I approached them and said, would this be something you're interested in working together on? We already had this relationship that was built on trust and shared values and perspectives, and just knowing one another as people, which I think has like been essential to even thinking this was something that we could do together, and that we want to do and are doing together. Okay. So we've decided, let's do this. Let's make a zine to sort of translate the findings of this research that Marcus and I are doing our masters on, and translate it in a way that is like accessible and valuable to community. And so to do that, we're going to be hosting design jam sessions. So this is where a lot of our grant, or where a lot of the support for the grant is going, to reimburse community members for their time. But over the summer, we're going to be hosting 2 design jams with about 10 to 12 members of the community group at each. We decided on doing, initially we're going to do 1 group. We decided after talking together that 2 was probably a better decision, out of recognition of the different perspectives that folks might come to the design jam sessions with. There are a lot of members of the community group who are very into like advocacy and activism, and very like comfortable in their sexuality, and would definitely have no issues partaking in something like this, which can be sort of a sensitive topic for some folks. Whereas there are other folks in the group who are might be a little bit more uncomfortable with having those conversations. And so we wanted to make sure that we were still able to get the perspectives of those folks, and not have them feel talked over by folks who are just excited and more comfortable having those conversations. So we're having 1 session that's sort of the more like we call them like the sexy session, and then like the tamer session. And so in those design jams, Marcus and I will be presenting a summary of the findings of the interviews that we did to the group members. And then from there, as a group, we will all be discussing the findings in order to determine what folks want in the zine, what they think is important to include. And then after that, we'll be engaging in collage making while doing some reflection on the research, folks' lived experiences, things like that. And even that act of making zines, or like doing this collage activity, can represent a meaningful process in and of itself, and can facilitate improved well-being through that act of creation. So then the next part is the creation of the zine itself. The design jam participants will be invited to include their pages in the final zine if they're comfortable with that. If they're comfortable with that. If they're not, then that's totally fine. And then we'll also be putting out a call for artists who are TGD to support the creation of sort of more academic parts of the zine. And so we'll use the insights gained from the discussions at the design jams to guide what those more academic pages include and how those are presented. And the artists will be compensated for their work using grant funding. We chose to make a zine because it's a very accessible form of knowledge exchange or knowledge translation. And it also has precedence within the TGD community. Zines facilitate autonomous and agentic knowledge circulation for TGD folks, allowing discussion of underaddressed experiences shared by community members. And within a research context, arts-based methods are increasingly recognized for their ability to communicate health knowledge accessibly while also promoting equity and understanding. Our hope is that the end product will be a resource that offers an empowering blend of academic information and personal reflections that is fully informed by lived experience. So even though we weren't able to incorporate co-creation from the very beginning, it's still fully sort of made by community members. Marcus and I approach this research as TGD community members, The folks that we interviewed were all community members, and then the folks who are going to be really driving this zine design are community members. And then we also hope that by highlighting the positive sexual potential of TGD adults in this resource, it will hopefully help to challenge healthcare providers' ideas of what their patients and clients can and do experience in terms of sexuality, hopefully contributing to more meaningful and productive clinical encounters. And I apologize because I think I'm over time. I will try to speed up towards the end here. So in terms of the model that we used for our co-creation, I'm just going to talk about it a little bit. We used the knowledge action model developed by Graham et al. And published in 2006. This model was developed in response to confusion among researchers about how to take knowledge that isn't really doing anything, is just sitting sort of inside academia or in the ivory tower, how to take that and actually make it do something, move it to action. There are two overarching phases, knowledge creation and knowledge action. The sort of more like traditional academic research piece that I was talking about falls into the knowledge creation phase, and then this zine co-creation sort of falls into the knowledge action phase. I won't talk too much about knowledge creation, but essentially at this phase, the idea is to like funnel or distill knowledge from something overwhelming and inaccessible in like academic terms into something that is broadly usable. So basically, we're going from all the literature that exists, Marcus and I looking at that, doing our interviews that we did based on that, and then taking those findings and communicating them in a way that is accessible to the community group we're working with to prompt the design jams. Then in the knowledge action phase, this entails conducting the activities needed for implementing or applying knowledge, which is where the co-creative zine design comes in. The first step was identifying a problem and knowledge that might address it, which was basically just the whole knowledge creation phase, adapting the knowledge. This step is critical to actually transitioning knowledge to action. And so to accomplish that step, we'll be having those conversations with community members about the research findings to gain perspective on like things that are most salient to them, what concerns they have about any of the knowledge presented, if any, how do they want the findings communicated, et cetera. And that dialogue will not only shape the form that the co-created zine takes, but also will influence how we structure the publication of research, informal research output settings. Then establishing barriers to knowledge uptake, so having conversations about what might prohibit, but also what might support. So things like circulating through other groups that we're connected with, being forthcoming that this is a fully community-made resource, things like that. Promoting awareness and implementation of knowledge translation, which is sort of just the dissemination phase. So again, connecting with other groups that we have connections with, monitoring knowledge use to establish the effect that the knowledge is having, what's working, what isn't. Our hope is that the zine will facilitate conceptual use of knowledge, which describes changes in levels of knowledge, understanding, or attitudes. So again, empowering community members, as well as instrumental use of knowledge, which describes changes in behavior or practice. So hopefully encouraging or prompting further conversation around changing the dynamics of clinical encounters, even if it's just healthcare providers being more willing to talk about sexuality with TGD patients or clients, and keeping an open mind about the plethora of experiences of sexuality that folks can have. Then determining the impact of knowledge. We'll be doing some quantitative pre-post research to sort of see what the impact of the zine is further down the line. And then sustaining ongoing knowledge use, which we are still in conversations about. And if anyone has any thoughts about strategies for that, then I would love to hear that. Okay, some super quick reflections based on where we are now. Obviously not done, still ongoing, but some things that I've sort of taken away from the last year, um, is that co-creation can be slow. Um, it's something that I heard from other folks very early on in this journey, but it remains true, having to balance multiple parties, multiple timelines, conflicting interests of institutions. So that's important to be mindful of and be prepared for. Being mindful of the capacity of your co-creation partners. So like I'm a student, this is like my whole thing. I can devote tons of time to this. The chair of the community group we're working with has a full-time job, is involved with a ton of other groups in their community. There are things that I have the capacity to do that they don't. So being mindful of that when determining workload and division of labor. Connection between parties is really important. I've already spoken on that. And we can maybe talk about that more in the Q&A because I do want to make sure I wrap up. But yeah, again, this wouldn't be possible without the connection that I had to the chair of this community group and to that community. And then lastly, if you've never done co-creation, I think you can do co-creation. I was really nervous about like feeling like I was doing it imperfectly because we didn't do it from the get-go of this project. But I think that as long as folks approach it with good intentions and are committed to engaging in it mindfully and equitably and committed to learning, then it can still be successful, even if it isn't, I guess, the ideal. So I think that's it for me. And I'll let us go into the Q&A period, and then I've got references as well, which will be sent out with the PDF after.
Thank you so much, Brian. This was very lovely. And I love how you ended off, just encouraging people and telling them, hey, if you've never done co-creation, like this is not, nothing should stop you if you have that right heart set mindset. And that's the term that we like to use with the team, like the emotional readiness and the mental readiness to embrace such a process like co-creation. If you have that desire and approach it with the proper principles and attitudes, it's okay if there's no perfect plan. The goal is to start and like embracing the change and evolution of ideas over time, as you have done, and you've articulated so well. So this has been really amazing to hear. Yes, thank you, Brian. We have a couple comments in the chat already to get us started. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So Ollie here says, move at the speed of trust. And so I think that was in response to your own effort to like prioritize trust building and relationship building and not rush the process. All these raised their hands. So if you'd like to say more about that, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Where's my hair? Thanks so much, Brian. This was wonderful. I can't wait to see like the outcome of this and the design. Yeah, I heard that in another webinar, and I cannot remember which one, but it was about like, oh, it was about midwives in New Zealand and working with the community around decolonization and connecting specifically with the trans and gender diverse community, and how saying like everything is at moving at the speed of trust, which like institutions and some of the ethics boards and other barriers around I would say ethical research sometimes don't like, and especially with the time limit of an MA. So like kudos for you, and I think it was Marcus who said, for being able to kind of like uh push yourselves to do this and be able to connect to community in that way. I also wanted to ask Brian if you connected to like Arden Gibbs or Adrian Crossman at McMaster, and their work on zines, as well as like I know them through the McMaster Trans Advocacy Group, and if you haven't heard of us, it's called MTAG. And anyone else on the call that might be interested in who is trans or is an ally to us for staff, students, and faculty at Mac to help create a space for us to talk about our research, talk about if we have any barriers or how to connect, or also just like also advocacy within and beyond McMaster. But yeah, I was just wondering if you connected to Arden or Adrian.
haven't, and I hadn't heard of MTAG, so I appreciate you letting me know. No, I feel like I don't know, because I am, I guess now not new, but new to Hamilton, new to McMaster, recent enough in my life, and yeah, have been. I think like no one's like, here's all the groups that will be good for you.
Yeah.
So I will thank you. Yeah,
No,
I'll follow up. But yeah, I haven't connected, and I'll send an email because I think that sounds like an awesome resource, like talking about that
yes.
dissemination piece, to
Yeah.
circulate, because yeah, I've reached out to like a few groups on campus, but I think that would definitely be a very pertinent one.
I came to, so I'm from Hamilton, but I'm actually in Ottawa, completely remote, and
Mhm.
I created MTAG 3 years ago because our like PACBIC group, like the President's Inclusion Community, whatever group, for
Mhm.
gender and sexuality, just wasn't up and running and still isn't, you know?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
then I was like, where are my trans people? So this is because I was fresh out of my master's and like I'm really connected to community, so I wanted to make sure that I continue that connection, and so. It is. We're not like online. We're trying to get like a SharePoint to have resources to be shared. But it's like it's more like if you're able to connect to somebody who's connected, then you're connected. But it's hard to
Mhm.
have that outreach. So yeah, anyone else on the call, send us an email. Thanks so much, Brian.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Ollie.
That's lovely. No, and this is the purpose of the webinar is for us to be connected with new people and also build the relationships among the people in the call here. So thank you, Ollie. And in the spirit of sharing contacts that might help you, Brian, there's an associate professor named Andrea Zafiro in the Department of Communication at McMaster who works with Yelena Vermillion from SWAP Hamilton. I think they stand for Sex Worker Action Program, and they do a
Yeah.
lot of work with zines and all of that. So I don't know if you've reached out ever, but there may be cross learning that could happen, or they could give you some support and stuff. So are you aware of those two?
I know of Yelena. Yeah, we met
Okay.
at the um oh, what's it called? The they don't call it, or community engaged research days last year.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I, okay, amazing. So that's already happened. Going back to the chat, Arlene says, thank you for your incredible research and initiatives. We know the tremendous value of expansion in these significant spheres as we sit at the intersection of research and resources based on self-esteem and bullying, with a focus on philanthropy and innovation. So I guess she's part of a group named Embrace Health Foundation, which deals with mental health and supporting youth through self-esteem and other issues. So I would imagine that if that might connect with your project around changes in self-esteem and self-perception and of those sorts. So that could be a potential contact as well. Happy to learn more. Any other folks have comments about Brian's project or general comments, questions for the two groups? At this point, Michelle had raised a question about learnings and anything that changed about your project over time. Let me pull that up again. Do you want to share anything that you learned or changed along the way? And I think, Brian, you've already shared those reflections at the very end of your presentation. Maya and team, is there anything you'd like to say about Michelle's question there? Anything you learned or changed along the way?
Happy to see if Rebecca or Nellie have any thoughts they want to share first. And then if not, I'm always happy to chime in later.
Yeah, I can share. So my family was very hesitant to engage in research spaces. My little sister's perspectives and autistic perspectives in general are often treated merely as data. So for my family, there was almost this forced acceptance that that's how she would always have to engage in this kind of research and research about her care. So when I first started university, the opportunity for me to be involved in a project and in a space that intentionally centered autistic perspectives was very meaningful for me and my family as a whole. And I've always understood how important her lived experience is in shaping these processes. So, with five autistic youth on our team, we were always learning and adapting throughout um, the process and these practices are things that I've gone on to take to other projects as well, like the clearer guidelines, the more thoughtful communication. And there's still a lot of work to do, but the fact that these conversations are happening and these projects and frameworks like Aspire exist is a very meaningful shift. And that's definitely something that's been meaningful to me. And I've further learned the importance of.
Well, thank you, Anelli. And that just speaks to, again, how important it is to have people with the lived experience involved in these projects to give shape direction and voice any concerns that may inadvertently lead to participants feeling excluded or uncomfortable. And so you bringing that lived experience, um, and also seeing the project as one that um, addresses some concerns that you've had based off of past experiences, is really great, showing that you guys are doing really great work. Anyone else want to share their reflections as we wrap up, as we wait for other folks to ask any last minute questions?
You can go ahead, Michelle.
No, go ahead. Share your reflection because mine's a new thought.
Okay. My reflection was, I think for me as like the lead PhD student, I'm not autistic myself. I think like having the opportunity to bring kind of co-design principles into practice, there was lots of learnings for me. I think through each meeting, we got different feedback. So one thing that stands out to me is like, I think initially to try to be more accessible, I to try to be more accessible and to also try to not be prescriptive about what had to happen. I think I was trying to be a little bit more open ended and like, it could be this and we could do that. And, if it works for you to do this within the next month, that's great. If it works in 2 weeks, that's great. Because for some things that was true. But I think that the lack of clear deadlines or the lack of like, but what is this task and what should it be was always like a balancing act for me of like letting our team members shape the processes and shape what's going to happen. But also, I've realized that there's ways to do that while being a little bit more explicit and making up a deadline that is going to work for the project, that is the deadline, and coming up with a description that I think is closest to what it'll be and being open to feedback about it versus putting that labor, I guess, onto the team members to decide that for themselves, which I think is an added layer of work.
Yes, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah. It was such a privilege to learn from both of these teams. Well, Maya, yours over time, and Brian, to hear from you today. I, I just wanted to share a reflection that when we created these small seed grants to help build capacity around co-creation and enable students to do projects that were meaningful to them, I was one of the people who sat on the review committee. So I got to see your applications come through, and I was so excited by the projects that were submitted. And now to see them coming to fruition, and Brian, I can't wait to see the zine that's created at the end of your project. That's going to be incredible. I really wanted to give both teams kudos for making so much out of this opportunity. I think it's done exactly what the Equity Based Co-Creation Group was hoping, and also offers teams an opportunity to join a student network and to learn from one another and receive the support and encouragement of one another, because they're not easy things and they're messy and they take some figuring out. So just kudos to both teams.
Yes, absolutely. Congratulations on all of your amazing work to the two of you as two of our incredible EQCC Innovation Grant recipients for last year. So thanks, Michelle, for also bringing that up, because that was the focus of the webinar too, amplifying these projects based off from our students. Lynn, yes, feel free to share your question or comment.
My name is Lynn. I'm a postdoc researcher at CAMH right now, and I've been doing some work also with like engaging autistic youth and caregivers in a research study. So your presentation was like really interesting to me, and I appreciated all the thought that got put into the co-design process. And so I'm also interested in continuing to do more of this work and doing more co-design with autistic people. So I was just wondering, do you have plans to, like, in terms of disseminating the work, will you be thinking of putting together like toolkits or kind of like, tools for researchers to use? I think it would be really helpful. I was trying to take some notes during the presentation, but yeah, like having something that is easy to pull up and access um, to kind of guide that process would be super helpful because similar to you, it's my first time doing this and I've learned throughout the process and have made various adaptations. Um, but if I had something like from the outset that would have guided me, I think I would have changed some of the things that I've done along the way, but earlier on in my work. So yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would say we definitely have plans for those kinds of outputs. Like, in addition to kind of the interview data and the focus group data, we also have an evaluation of the co-design experience component, where participants filled out the PPEET, which is the public and patient engagement evaluation tool. And O'Nellie's going to help lead that analysis along with the rest of our team to really evaluate the participants' experience of co-design and then document in more detail the methodological steps that we took for that co-design. Maybe some other more perspectives-y commentary things too to share a bit about how our team worked together. But obviously beyond papers, plain language knowledge dissemination too, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Alrighty, folks, I'm looking to see if anyone has any last minute questions. It doesn't seem like it, and we're at near the 1:30 mark, so I'll just share some final slides just to wrap us up. Thank you again to Brian, Maya, O'Nelly, and Rebecca for your presentations. I will include a follow-up email sharing everyone's contact information for folks to reach out if they would like to continue the conversation, and also slides as well. So without further ado, I have a few announcements to make. If you are not already oh no, I pressed the wrong button. If you are not already subscribed to our newsletter, please scan this QR code to join our mailing list. This is where I send updates around any opportunities that our EQCC Hub has available for you all. So that is right here. I'll also send a message in the chat for quick access. It will also be in the slides that I will share back. We have a new micro-credential course available now that launched in October. If you would like to learn more about EQCC, Lynn mentioned that this is new to you as well. A lot of people want to embrace the approach but don't know where to start. This is an asynchronous non-academic course that would take about 4 to 6 hours to complete that is now available for you to register. We accept registrations on an ongoing basis. And so many different groups can take this course, from students, lived experience advisors, community members, health and social system leaders, and others who fall in between. This is open for all. If you're interested to learn more, you can email us at codesign@mcmaster.ca or head to our website, which is codesign.mcmaster.ca. The link is also in the chat that I've put in for you. If you're interested in learning more about our process of sowing and growing and planting seeds of co-creation that grow over time and can be merged to be stronger together through the case examples from different projects that happen internationally, there's a new paper that was published in April, written by members of our team and other collaborators. And so here is the QR code to access that publication. The video explaining the sowing and growing model is also available now on YouTube. So just head over to McMaster Equity-Based Co-Creation Hub at YouTube, and I will provide the link in a follow-up email as well. Last but not least, please share your feedback on this session today using this survey. We'd like to hear a few things that you liked about it or what we can improve for next time. We will have one more webinar to wrap up this series for the 2025 to 2026 year in either May or June, and then we'll wrap up for the year and continue in the fall. And so stay on the lookout for that next and final session. I think this brings us to the end. I'll stop sharing. Thank you again all for for being here. I love that reaction. Thank you for clapping. Team and audience, we hope you enjoy the presentation. We'll be in touch and have a great rest of your day and weekend.